Robin Williams drops the microphone. Silence falls. The audience holds its breath, because this moment was actually the end of a story that began years ago. The comedy Cellar, New York City. September 2013. A Thursday night show that was supposed to be like any other. 200 people packed into a small basement venue, expecting laughter, expecting the manic energy Robin was famous for. They got something else entirely. He was mid-routine. A bit about technology, about how smartphones were making us dumber. The crowd was laughing, riding the wave of his improvisation. Then he stopped. Not a comedic pause. A real stop. The kind that makes a room go cold. His eyes locked onto someone in the front row. An elderly woman, maybe 75, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days. She wasn't laughing. She was crying. Quiet tears streaming down her face, her hand trembling as she held a folded piece of paper. Robin's face changed. The mask dropped. Anyone who knew him recognized that look, the one where the performer disappeared and the man underneath surfaced, raw and unguarded. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice completely different from the character he'd been playing seconds before. "Are you okay?" The woman nodded, but the tears kept coming. She tried to speak, couldn't, then held up the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. But what Robin didn't know was that this piece of paper contained words that would unravel him completely, words he'd written himself, 23 years ago, to someone he thought he'd never see again. If you want to understand how a single moment can redefine a lifetime, subscribe now, because the most powerful part of Robin's story is still ahead. The venue went absolutely silent. Even the server stopped moving. 200 people became witnesses to something that wasn't supposed to happen in a comedy club, a moment of genuine, unscripted human connection. Robin stepped down from the stage. Protocol broken. Performance abandoned. He walked to the woman, knelt beside her chair, and took the paper from her trembling hands. It was a letter. Yellowed with age, creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. His own handwriting stared back at him. He recognized it immediately, the letter he'd written in 1990 to a young mother in a hospital in San Francisco. Her daughter had been dying. Leukemia. 8 years old. The mother had written to him, a desperate letter that somehow found its way through layers of management and assistance. She told him her daughter loved Mrs. Doubtfire, watched it every day, could recite every line. She'd asked if there was any way, any possible way, he could send a message. He'd done more than that. He'd gone to the hospital. Spent 3 hours with that little girl. Made her laugh until she forgot about the tubes and the machines. And when he left, he'd written a letter to the mother. A letter he never expected to see again. "You told me," the woman said, her voice barely a whisper but somehow carrying in the dead silence of the room, "that even when the laughter stops, the love doesn't. You told me that every time I heard someone laugh, I could remember her laughing. You told me that was her gift to the world." Robin's throat tightened. His eyes, those eyes that had sparkled with manic energy moments before, filled with tears. "Your daughter," he said. "Sarah. You remember her name." "I remember her." What happened next wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, wasn't anything anyone in that room expected. It was the moment Robin Williams realized that everything he'd spent his life doing had finally come full circle. The audience sat frozen. Some were crying. Others looked away, feeling like they were intruding on something too private, too sacred for public viewing. Robin still knelt beside the woman. "Why didn't you ever reach out again?" he asked. "Because you'd already given us everything," she said. 3 hours of your time when you were at the height of your career. A letter that I've carried every day since she died. You gave us a gift we could never repay. I didn't know she passed. 2 weeks after you visited. But those last 2 weeks, Robin, she was happy. Really happy. She talked about you every day. About how funny you were, how kind. She told everyone in the hospital that Robin Williams was her friend. Something broke in him. Visibly, physically broke. His shoulders sagged. The weight of decades of performance, of carrying other people's joy while struggling with his own darkness, seemed to pour out of him in that moment. "I think about her sometimes," he said quietly. "I think about all of them. The kids in hospitals, the soldiers overseas, everyone I've ever tried to make laugh. I wonder if it matters. If any of it really matters." The woman reached out and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "It's the only thing that matters," she said. "You gave my daughter joy in her darkest hour. You gave me a reason to keep living when she was gone. You've given millions of people a reason to smile when they had none. How can you even question if it matters?" For the first time in his career, Robin Williams had no response. No joke to deflect with. No character to hide behind. Just silence, and tears, and the weight of understanding that his life's work wasn't measured in box office numbers or Emmy Awards. It was measured in moments like these. He stood slowly, helped the woman to her feet, and hugged her. A long, genuine embrace that had nothing to do with performance, and everything to do with shared grief, shared love, and the impossible burden of surviving loss. When they finally separated, he turned to face the audience. His face was streaked with tears. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't do comedy tonight. I can't pretend to be funny right now." No one moved. No one demanded a refund. No one complained. They just watched as he wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. "Let me tell you about Sarah," he said. "Let me tell you about a little girl who loved to laugh, and what she taught me about why any of this matters." What followed wasn't a comedy routine. It was something else entirely, a confession, a meditation on mortality and meaning, a raw exploration of what it means to be human. He talked about Sarah, about her courage, about the way she made him laugh even while fighting for her life. He talked about his own struggles, his depression, the darkness he carried that made him question whether bringing light to others was enough. He talked about the letter he'd written to Sarah's mother, words he'd forgotten until seeing them again. Even when the laughter stops, the love doesn't. Subscribe and share, because what Robin did next changed not just that night, but the trajectory of how he understood his entire life. The audience sat transfixed for 90 minutes. No laughter, just tears and contemplative silence, and the occasional gasp of recognition when he touched on something universally true about loss and love and the fragile beauty of human connection. When he finally finished, no one applauded at first. The silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable. Then someone in the back stood up. Then another. Then the entire room rose in unison, not clapping, just standing in silent tribute to what they'd witnessed, not a performance, but a transformation. Robin stood on that stage, looking out at 200 strangers who'd become something else in those 90 minutes. Witnesses. Companions. Fellow travelers in the strange journey of being alive and trying to make sense of suffering. Sarah's mother remained seated in the front row, still holding the letter, still crying, but smiling now too. Robin walked to her one more time, knelt down, and whispered something no one else could hear. Later, when asked what he'd said, she'd only smile and shake her head. "Some things," she'd reply, "are just between us." The show became legendary in comedy circles. Word spread about the night Robin Williams broke down on stage, abandoned his act, and gave the most honest 90 minutes of his career. But it wasn't the performance that mattered. It was what happened after. Robin started doing things differently. He stopped chasing the next big role, the next award. He started spending more time with people like Sarah's mother, parents who'd lost children, veterans struggling with PTSD, anyone carrying the kind of pain that comedy couldn't quite reach. He'd sit with them, listen to them, and share his own struggles more openly. He carried a copy of that letter with him everywhere. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he'd take it out and read his own words back to himself. Even when the laughter stops, the love doesn't. 3 months after that night at the Comedy Cellar, he visited a children's hospital in Los Angeles. Unannounced, no cameras, no publicity. He spent 7 hours there, going room to room, making kids laugh when they could, sitting in silence with them when they couldn't. A nurse who worked that day remembered him sitting with a teenage boy who had terminal brain cancer. The boy was mostly unresponsive, but Robin sat beside his bed for an hour, just talking quietly, telling stories, occasionally reaching out to hold the boy's hand. "Why do you do this?" the nurse had asked him afterward. "It must be so hard." Robin had smiled, that sad, knowing smile he'd worn since the night at the Comedy Cellar. "Because someone has to remember them," he'd said. "Someone has to carry their stories forward. And if making people laugh is the only gift I have, then I need to give it to the people who need it most." The boy died 2 days later. His mother told reporters that in his final lucid moments, he'd said Robin Williams had visited him, and he wanted everyone to know that he'd gotten to laugh one more time. That's what Robin Williams understood that night in the Comedy Cellar, what Sarah's mother had reminded him of with her tears and her letter and her fierce grip on his hand. Laughter isn't frivolous. It's not shallow entertainment or empty distraction. It's a form of love. It's how we tell each other that despite everything, despite pain and loss and the certainty of death, we're here together, and that matters. Share this story if you believe in the power of human connection. Subscribe so you never miss moments that remind us why we're here. Robin Williams struggled with depression for most of his life. He fought battles in private that most people never knew about. He carried darkness that sometimes felt unbearable. But he also carried something else, an understanding that joy, even temporary joy, even fragile joy, is worth creating. Sarah's mother continued coming to his shows. Not every show, but enough that he'd recognize her in the crowd, would catch her eye, would know that someone out there understood what he was really trying to do beneath all the characters and voices and manic energy. 2 years later, when Robin's own struggles became too much, when the darkness finally overwhelmed him, Sarah's mother was among the thousands who mourned. She gave an interview to a local newspaper, talking about the man behind the legend, the person who'd sat with her dying daughter and then, years later, had let her return that gift of presence and understanding. "He spent his whole life trying to make people laugh," she said, "because he knew what it was like to cry alone. He understood pain because he lived it. And he never stopped believing that bringing light to others was worth the cost to himself." The night at the Comedy Cellar became part of Robin Williams' legend, but not in the way most performances do. It wasn't remembered for jokes or improvisation or comedic genius. It was remembered as the moment a performer became fully human in front of an audience, the moment the mask dropped completely, and what remained was just a man trying to understand if his life's work had meaning. The answer was in Sarah's mother's tears. In the 200 people who stood in silent tribute. In every child who laughed in a hospital bed, every soldier who smiled in a war zone, every person struggling with darkness who found temporary light in his work. Even when the laughter stops, the love doesn't. That was his gift to the world. That was what he learned from an 8-year-old girl dying of leukemia, what he relearned from her mother 23 years later, what he carried with him until the end. Somewhere in New York City, in a small comedy club basement, there's a stage where Robin Williams once stopped everything to honor a promise he'd made to a little girl. Where he let himself be broken open, let himself be seen, let himself acknowledge that the burden of bringing joy to others while carrying private pain was both his curse and his calling. That stage is still there. Comedians perform on it every night. They tell jokes, do crowd work, chase laughs. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the crowd is small and the atmosphere is intimate, someone in the audience will remember. They'll remember the night Robin Williams reminded everyone in that room that comedy isn't just about laughter, it's about love, connection, and the courage to be vulnerable in front of strangers. His legacy isn't just the movies or the awards or the iconic performances. It's in the letter Sarah's mother still carries. It's in the children he visited who went on to tell their own children about the day a famous comedian made them forget they were sick. It's in every person who chooses to bring light to someone else's darkness, even when their own darkness feels overwhelming. Robin Williams stopped everything that night because he realized something profound. The audience hadn't just come to laugh. They'd come to be seen, to be understood, to be reminded that their pain mattered, that their joy mattered, that they mattered. And in that moment, when he dropped the microphone and let himself be fully human, he gave them the greatest gift a performer can give: permission to feel everything, without apology, without shame. Sarah's mother still carries that letter. And somewhere, in the silence between laughter, love remains.